Welcome back. Our first keynote speaker will be Professor Laura Punnett, who is a musculoskeletal epidemiologist and ergonomist and co-director of the Center for the Promotion of Health in the New England Workplace, one of the first two NIOSH-funded Centers of Excellence in Total Worker Health. Laura, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, George, for that kind introduction, and to all of the organizers for the honor of this presentation. I'll do my best to offer some useful thoughts about what opportunities and obstacles exist for our field at this point in time, and how we can collectively prepare for what's coming in the changes in the work world. My comments are greatly informed by my experience over the past 15 years as part of CPH New, which was one of the first two total worker health centers. We're based at 3 institutions. Many faculty, staff, and students have been involved. And my special gratitude to Martin Cherniak, my co-director throughout this time, without whom I wouldn't be here today. So where are we coming from, first of all? We recognize, I think, this traditional paradigm. This is how I was trained as a graduate student, that there are stable jobs, that people will often stay in those for long periods of time, making fixed cohort studies possible. And within those cohorts, we can assume reasonably stable basic working conditions like hours and wages and benefits, even if we have to track some changes in exposure over the years. We put much attention to really tangible hazards, safety and chemicals and physical vectors, measurable exposures. Of course, these are still very important. I'm certainly not suggesting that the old problems have gone away. We're still facing huge problems with silica and heat stress and heavy lifting, other forms of excessive physical workload. But obviously, our focus now needs to be even more expanded. We also operated on the principle largely of studying and fixing one hazard at a time. And this was partly driven by our statistical methods, and also partly by the goal of conducting research in the service of public policy, and especially rulemaking through OSHA. Of course, we now are looking at a much broader range of concerns within our field. The eroding line between work and not work isn't news to any of us. We ourselves, I think, experience ways in which the 24/7 work cycle has invaded our personal lives. And of course, it's taking new forms as technologies evolve. These new forms of work organization and technologies pose problems for workers and problems for us as occupational safety and health practitioners. First of all, because they're adopted by employers who, because they're investing in them, are reluctant to question their impact and the balance between benefits and challenges, or who the benefits are accruing to. And also because the forms of distributed work and irregular work schedules and lack of routinized job descriptions for many people pose inherent obstacles to the worker communication with each other and our outreach to them, our process of communicating with them. For training or for data collection. So these evolve into challenges for research as well. And also, how do we define gig work is an ongoing problem. There are many different ways to characterize the new forms of work organization. Some of these aren't new at all. Electronic monitoring has been around for quite a while, but it's become quite a bit more sophisticated. I have a colleague who's a vice president in an insurance company who, during the pandemic, discovered that when working from home, when he got up and walked away from his computer monitor, if he was gone for more than a certain number of minutes, he would automatically be logged out and he would have to log back in for his work hours to restart on the clock. So it can be observed in all socioeconomic levels and in a wide variety of jobs, given the ways that technology is evolving. A couple of issues that we've been paying particular attention to at CPH-NU include the lack of organizational commitment to safety, or the impact of organizational commitment above and beyond, but also acting through actual safety procedures. What I mean by that is that the concern about safety is a real one for workers, but feeling that the organization devalues their safety relative to short-term gains is an additional stressor that has very real impacts on people. And we've actually been measuring this in the healthcare setting with regard to burnout and depression. Emotional labor is another important issue that's, I think, become increasingly visible during the COVID pandemic. This is the idea of having to mask your internal reactions in order to carry out your job. It's a common feature of healthcare work and education and social services. And of course, in many client-facing jobs, such as airline gate attendants, and we are seeing it increasingly in the news for retail workers and food service people. So the need to respond politely to a customer who's rude and internally restrain one's own natural emotional reaction is a functional adaptation to a particular circumstance, but over time, if it's a chronic issue, it can become extremely stressful. We also want to highlight, again, this isn't a new fact, it's a more recently recognized fact, the role of psychosocial strain and mental health in many disease processes. We tend to think about job strain as an issue for mental health outcomes and for cardiovascular disease outcomes. But in fact, many biological disease processes are impacted by the levels of corticosteroids, by the impact on the immune system and other physiological ripple effects. And furthermore, job strain poses issues for us in reporting and in research and in practice. Workers who are under more psychosocial stress at work may be less likely to participate in our studies. They may be less likely to report injuries to management. They may be less likely to or able to use control measures that are offered because of time pressure, for example. So it's a topic that we really need to be aware of, regardless of what the area is that we're studying. And I think one good example of how broad this can be is the work that Case and Beaton published a few years ago on what they called the diseases of despair, or deaths of despair, where they wrote about the combined impact of financial stress, psychosocial job strain, and chronic pain in relation to mortality from substance abuse and suicide. And then lastly, I just want to remind us that the work hazards that we have studied for many years, as well as the new ones, occur in the context of socioeconomic disparities and actually drive socioeconomic disparities to some extent, as well as in the context of racial and gender disparities in well-being. I think it hopefully is obvious that the association between occupational risk, risk factors and exposures with low socioeconomic status means that these also have a particular impact on immigrant communities and people of color. And I think this impact is still somewhat understudied. So while these aren't new concerns, they're still not fully integrated into our research and practice. So I want to encourage us to think about these as important issues as we move forward. So what are we moving towards then with these thoughts in mind? Well, it's useful to develop a positive vision of where we'd like to be. I'm sorry, I have to snooze my phone.
Yeah, not a problem. You just pick it up from the top of that slide. Would be fine.
Yeah, I'll start at the beginning of that slide. Sorry, I thought I had silenced it, but obviously you probably heard it beeping.
Yeah.
Okay. How many minutes in are we?
All right, unmute. I'm at 11 minutes right now. So we'll just count the last minute. So about 10 minutes in.
Okay. Okay, ready. So with these thoughts in mind, where are we going now? It's useful for us to develop a positive vision of where we'd like to be in order to have a goal to move forwards to, in order to know how to train our students and how to sell our work to employers, to workers, and to others that we might partner with. A variety of organizations are already framing visions that overlap with the needs of occupational health and safety more broadly. The ILO and the WHO have these models for decent work or healthy workplaces that are widely distributed. The Healthy Work Campaign at the Center for Social Epidemiology is another resource that's been extremely useful for us and an interesting strategy for how to move forward on these issues in practice. The Lowell Center for Sustainable Production is focused on aligning occupational health with environmental production, sustainable production, and products. And that includes their newest program, which is the Cancer-Free Economy. The World Health Organization, among these visions, is notable for the Ottawa Charter of 1986, their statement on health promotion, where they highlighted the importance of environmental conditions as an important component of the social determinants of health. The document didn't say much explicitly about the work environment, but the concepts readily apply. For example, in terms of environmental conditions that foster healthy behaviors, do work schedules support or interfere with leisure time exercise or participation in smoking cessation programs? Do they provide enough time for preparing healthy meals or unwinding after work? In terms of positive human relations, does the quality of supervision or coworker relationships increase psychological stress or buffer its negative effects? So we can see here that health promotion is being framed in terms of identifying and removing obstacles to health and supporting positive decision-making about health. And this also shows that we're talking about something much broader than participation in formal programs like weight loss or smoking cessation. This is about healthy behaviors in one's life. I might not be a joiner of a support group to lose weight, but perhaps I love to go for a walk after dinner every night, or I want to bicycle to work. So these are also healthy behaviors that work can impact and that the environment can support or not support. The health promotion literature is starting to address environmental conditions, but slowly and mostly not yet directly the work environment. And just like in our own field, the practice lags well behind the research. So this, again, I think is something where we can work to move these concepts forward. The Ottawa Charter obviously predated NIOSH beginning this new program, which was originally called the WorkLife Initiative. This definition is out of date, but I'm referencing here to call attention to the fact that it originated partly from NIOSH personnel thinking about low socioeconomic status workers and the range of threats to their health, both outside as well as inside the workplace, and to their lack of access to workplace health promotion programs, which at this time was the primary focus of WorkLife Initiative. And to unpack this a little bit, again, hopefully we recognize that low socioeconomic status jobs typically entail higher exposure to a broad range of hazards at work. They are more physically strenuous, they have more acute safety hazards, they're more likely to involve chemical exposures, and they, especially kind of inherent in the nature of these jobs, they have lower decision latitude, both at the job level, meaning can I choose what I do when during the workday, and can I take time off for a phone call, and can I adjust my hours to accommodate my family needs, but also decision latitude at the institutional level. Any kinds of decisions about how resources are allocated, how people's time is used, what policies are put into place, and so on. Of course, also inherently, these are jobs with lower income, meaning fewer resources for health in any form, and also lower assets, both as a result of lower income and also because these are jobs where, because injury is more common, the loss of income and assets that follows injury is greater. And this has been documented by Monica Galizzi and Les Bowden, among others. And of course, people of color, especially African Americans, also often carry the impact of many years of being limited in the type of work available to them, the opportunities, the ability to access resources. So the gap in terms of assets is extraordinary for that group. People with less money tend to live in neighborhoods that have less access to healthy food, fewer safe places to walk or exercise, so the ability to have healthier behaviors may be constrained in this way. And workplace health promotion programs often have uneven scope, meaning higher participation and effectiveness among higher socioeconomic status employees, people with more resources and often fewer health needs overall. And we as professionals, I think, also experience some ways that work might affect lifestyle. Time pressure, eating your lunch at your desk during a Zoom meeting, the 24/7 email monitoring. So I'm not saying that these are exclusive issues for people in lower wage jobs. And I also don't assume that we all grew up in economically comfortable circumstances. But if we did, we may be unaware of how much is going on under the surface in terms of how work might pose obstacles to healthy behaviors. Okay, so the WorkLife Initiative was renamed Total Worker Health almost 10 years ago. And this new definition highlights the term well-being, which has become almost a signature concept within the Total Worker Health program, defines a positive outcome to strive towards versus only avoiding hazards. And it also underscores and reiterates our traditional principles of highlighting engineering controls over administrative controls for addressing any occupational health and safety problem. And again, I want to highlight this graphic comes from the total worker health page of NIOSH. So they are continuing to underscore that we want to prioritize eliminating working conditions that are obstacles for health, safety, and well-being, and put the category of encouraging personal change as the last resort. So this emphasis on environmental determinants of health that we saw in the WHO statement continues here in the Total Worker Health Program. NIOSH also added this second point about the broad scope of risk factors of concern, and they acknowledge the blurred line between work-related and supposedly non-work-related health outcomes. We especially applauded this last sentence, the one I highlighted in red at CPH New, because it's a topic that we have been working on almost since the center began. And I believe that this point also has important implications for where we should be going as a field. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on this issue. During the same time period when NIOSH was creating and developing the Total Worker Health Program, a number of investigators around the world were starting to look at the question of whether and how work affects what we've previously labeled as lifestyle. So for example, this Japanese cohort study provided two exams 6 years apart for all study participants. And they characterized people's jobs on each of those two study occasions as being high or low in job isostrain, which means high quantitative job demands, low job control, and low social support. So that it's a three-part definition. And as you can see, people were characterized in terms of whether their jobs were low or high. Were low on both survey occasions, were high on one, and were high on both. And we can see a very clear exposure response relationship with this broad characterization of the psychosocial features of work in this study. This is just one of quite a number that have followed this in a variety of countries, some with extremely large data sets. Looking at these kinds of studies coming out in the literature, we wanted to unpack this a bit. We wanted to understand better in what ways job stressors are affecting people's ability to be healthy in their behaviors, even outside of the workplace. So we conducted a study with low-wage workers to gather their perspectives on what roles, if any, their work played in their health. They were employed, as you can see, in a wide variety of settings, and we had several groups that were conducted in Spanish in order to bring in a large proportion of Latino workers, as well as a substantial fraction in the Boston area who were African American. So this slide summarizes what they told us. We heard pretty much all of what we expected, and then much, much more. What we expected to hear was physically demanding work leaves me too fatigued to exercise, or even to stand at the stove and prepare healthy meals. My back or my shoulder hurts when I get off of work, so I've had to reduce the amount of leisure time exercise I can do. I'm a single parent. I'm rushing home after work to pick up my kids. All I have time for is to stop at a fast food place and get hamburgers for all of us. And then we also heard a long variety of other issues. People talked a lot about their irregular work schedules, not being able to get together and cook with friends or play soccer or basketball on Sunday afternoon or in the evenings when other people were free for those kinds of activities. We heard an enormous amount from people in several different sectors about meal breaks being too short. For example, I get the 30-minute mandated break during my shift, but I might get one break of 12 minutes and another break of 18 minutes. Neither one is long enough to eat in a healthy way. I don't have even time to microwave my food that I might have brought from home. I'm eating out of the vending machines because I have to stuff the food in my mouth so fast. People also talked a lot about meal breaks being very unpredictable. You come to work not knowing what time in the day you would get to eat. So whenever you had a meal break, even if you weren't hungry, you would stuff as much food as you could in your mouth because you didn't know when you would be able to eat again. People also talked about time pressure and just general stress causing them either to overeat or to eat less, different people compensating, reacting to that in different ways. Then we heard a number of stories about bullying or harassment or physical assault by either supervisors or coworkers, which led, of course, to people being very concerned about their work situation, whether they would be able to stay, whether the harassment would continue. Some people being clinically treated for depression, a lot of overeating, again, due to this kind of stress, but also people being prescribed medication, which was known to cause weight gain. So a whole web of issues resulting from jobs that, again, are not just physically demanding, but situations where people have low status, low credibility within the organization, low respect when they try to speak up about things or not feeling safe speaking up about their needs. We've learned some similar things in our research on correctional officers. This is from the group at the University of Connecticut who are a part of CPH New. Martin Cherniak has led this work for about 12 years now. Correctional officers are a severely understudied occupational group. They face specific safety hazards on the job, and also a great deal of psychosocial strain. And this has a high risk for chronic conditions and impacts their health in a variety of ways. There are also take-home issues for some, including alcohol overuse and strained family relationships, and so on. These are also work settings that pose major constraints on health behaviors. For example, the facility gyms are typically open to them after the shift ends, when the prisoners won't be there, of course. And so in theory, they could be getting exercise in those facilities, but for security issues, if a worker calls in sick or doesn't show up for a shift, any other correctional officer who's on the premises legally cannot refuse that next shift. So you can imagine how many people stay in the gym when they get off of work, because the gym counts as being on the premises. On the contrary, they are in their cars and down the driveway within about 60 seconds of getting out of work. So those gyms go unused by this workforce. Because of staffing shortages and these kinds of issues, it's not uncommon for them to have to work extra shifts, even though they do what they can to avoid it. And that raises the problem of having food for that extra time. So when they to avoid getting hungry, they would end up bringing enough food for 2 or even 3 shifts and then eating it all. Or if they failed to do that, ordering out often fairly unhealthy food from fast food establishments near the prisons. Our colleagues at the Center for Social Epidemiology have been doing similar investigations of what happens for firefighters, looking at the complex web of issues involving their work culture, the night work, the interruptions in sleep, the sedentary work interspersed with bursts of very strenuous activity. And they've similarly shown important impacts on exercise and dietary behaviors. And they've also shown that in a 2016 study that the risk of obesity increased measurably, substantially, with the number of additional 24-hour shifts that a firefighter had to work. In our nursing home research, we also quantified the effect of working conditions on quote unquote lifestyle issues. This slide shows leisure time physical activity in relation to the work organization stressors that are listed under the slide. So the outcome here is the prevalence of leisure time inactivity. And you can see that the more stressful working conditions an individual was experiencing and reported on survey, the less exercise they were getting during their personal time. And we had very similar findings for the prevalence of being overweight and the prevalence of smoking. All 3 of these topics have been studied by a number of people, and we actually are reaching the point where there's enough literature for systematic reviews. This one is actually not the most recent one, but summarized 22 prospective studies, screening on strong methodology, and highlighted very strong patterns in job stressors, including low job control, high job demands, and low social support. All 3 of these affecting how many cigarettes per day smoked, the ability to stop smoking, that is the success in stopping smoke, and the probability of relapse after smoking cessation. The literature isn't entirely consistent, but so there is still more to parse out, and there may well be effect modification. For example, are these associations different by shift characteristics, night versus day work, or length of shift, by the person's age or the age they started smoking, by job insecurity, and so on. We could frame a number of plausible questions to ask here. So the accumulation of this literature has provided insights into the mechanisms behind the well-established association between psychosocial strain and coronary heart disease. We've known for a while about the neuroendocrine mechanisms that underlie this association. It turns out that the impact of psychosocial stressors on health behaviors that I've just been describing, smoking, leisure time, physical activity, and so on, that pathway accounts for a very substantial proportion of the effect of psychosocial stressors on coronary heart disease. So we need to be very mindful, again, of the importance of job strain in attempting to improve overall worker well-being. In fact, I will go so far as to say that because low decision-making opportunity at work is such an important risk factor for chronic disease, as well as actually for workplace injury, any workforce health program should be designed with attention to whether it improves or further decreases worker decision-making opportunities. I would actually argue that the form of the program itself can increase or decrease autonomy at work. Remember, as the WHO told us, true health promotion isn't telling people what to do, it's making it possible for them to make good health choices. And a workforce health program can be an opportunity to increase people's decision latitude in at least one arena of the workplace. So if we engage with people as decision makers, our own efforts as researchers, as conducting intervention studies, we can help to create and model what the solution might look like, at least in one area. Participatory methods have value both in research and in practice. The engaging people directly has value in its own right, again, because of the critical role of decision autonomy in workers' health and well-being. It is, in essence, an opportunity to apply the hierarchy of controls to psychosocial job features. And furthermore, it leverages employee knowledge and experience for more effective, sustainable programs. Bringing in employees from all levels of the organization increases the probability of prioritizing issues appropriately and getting at the root causes of the problems. And it can lead to programs that are better embedded within the organization, therefore more sustainable. And it's a process that can support the program's continuous improvement. In contrast, if we ignore the contributions of job stressors, money that's spent on workforce health might be wasted because of limited effectiveness if the underlying causes aren't being addressed. We ourselves may be unaware of obstacles that workers face every day. And at best, the program will likely produce only short-term changes that aren't sustained. And it can even reduce the credibility of later occupational health and safety initiatives. This is doable. The hierarchy of controls, again, applies to psychosocial stressors, just as it does to other exposures at work. And ergonomists are or should be trained as much in work organization as in physical factors like heavy lifting. There are all sorts of guides and published experiences about ways of designing programs that increase employee autonomy and decision-making, encourage participation and creativity in problem solving, whether it's to structure healthier schedules or improve coworker relationships at work or other measures. We're looking for primary prevention of job stressors, not just increasing people's coping skills or encouraging them to relax after work. And I also want to note that participation has multiple meanings, starting with how many people respond to a survey or attend a training program. We report those out as participation measures as well. But what we're really talking about here are listening to workers, learning about their lived experiences. I've given a few examples in the last few minutes of what we can learn by asking open-ended questions about working conditions in relation to health, and partnering with workers not only to document these problems, but also to envision change. This also is not a new idea. Participatory action research has been around for a long time. Community-based participatory research isn't new. There are established protocols and strategies for engaging workers as partners to design effective and feasible solutions. But it's not easy. Martin Cherniak's phrase is, it's a negotiated and iterative process. It takes time to build trust. And that also means takes time to build trust with employers who may not be used to sharing any decision-making opportunities, as well as building trust with the workers that what they say and do won't end up being used against them. In fact, participatory research projects may be difficult to complete even within a 5-year grant period, and they can't be summarized with RCT-inspired evaluation models. So the ways of evaluating have to be adapted very often. Fidelity, for example, in an RCT program, fidelity is a goal. The program should be rolled out according to the protocol. But if you're encouraging workers to participate in designing a workforce health program, they may start customizing it and tailoring it to their own context, to their own situation and needs. And so fidelity may actually represent a high degree of participation and not a failure to follow the protocol. So this can make it really difficult to pool data across different work settings and to ensure that you aren't comparing apples to oranges. There are alternatives to RCT design. There's been a fair amount written about this in recent years in the public health literature. Realist evaluation utilizes a construct called context mechanism outcome configuration, or CMOC, in which we document the research context and the way in which the intervention succeeded or didn't in that setting. So it's essentially embedding the process evaluation within the evaluation of effectiveness. Impact or contribution analysis is another strategy. It's widely used in policy analysis, in education, and in other settings for evaluating institutional level change. And my thanks to Sarah Felkner for pointing me in this direction several years ago. So at CPH-NU, we've developed a systematic protocol for increasing participation in decision-making by frontline workers. I'll share just a couple of quick examples here. One of our very first trials was with a real estate management firm, specifically with the maintenance technicians taking care of the apartment units in this large apartment building complex. And they had many of the predictable types of acute injuries, as well as heat strain in the summer, wearing these very uncomfortable, impermeable overalls. And we engaged them to form teams of workers, asked them what they thought the biggest problems were. They themselves spoke with their coworkers and discussed the root causes of major problems in a systematic procedure. And we thought that they were going to select one of the more traditional topics to work on. But actually, workload and job stress were overriding concerns for these workers, with many contributing factors. Work orders coming in at all times of the day from many sources, often in duplication because of poor communications. Their pagers or phones had poor service in different parts of the campus. They would end up having to fix simple things that office staff or tenants could have handled themselves. They had to fix things repeatedly when the company bought inexpensive, poor quality parts. They had to wait long periods of time for decisions to be made by management. This also led to tenant complaints and poor relations between the workers and the tenants. And it was a bit overwhelming. We actually were concerned about the magnitude of what they were taking on. They developed a very impressive package of solutions with better use of the work order software system to organize and pace the flow of work more efficiently, They got direct access to the online system to manage work orders and better mobile devices for access while they were out answering calls. They themselves designed educational materials for tenants. They trained the office staff to solve some problems immediately without having to call them, and improved coworker relationships there as well. And they also created a recognition system to reward participation in all of this and acknowledge ongoing efforts in order to help sustain the program and continue improvements. So you can see how this kind of total worker health focus on underlying factors contributing to stress led to quite systemic changes with a very sophisticated understanding of the interaction of all of these issues. We could only do relatively short-term evaluation, but we conducted interviews with both groups after this effort was done. The workers who had participated in the design team were very enthusiastic about how effective the protocol had been, that they didn't just sit around talking about problems, but they had made change happen. And they felt that they had achieved better communication with management, and management echoed that achievement and emphasized how impressed they were by the capabilities of their own workers in ways that they had not appreciated previously. And they were very enthusiastic about seeing the program continue, not least because it turned out that they had been spending something like $250,000 per year for overtime work, much of which probably resulted from these kinds of issues. And the survey we did of all of the participants showed that in a wide range of areas compared to 1 year ago, there was improvement in morale and recognition, opportunities to share opinions, opportunities for decision-making, and so on. Another case study comes again from Martin Cherniak's group's work with correctional officers in Connecticut, where again we formed a design team of correctional officers and engaged leadership to create a steering committee to authorize time off for meetings and resources to be committed to this program. The design teams were formed at several different facilities alongside a statewide steering committee. And again, the workers themselves gathered data on a variety of topics and discussed how to prioritize those concerns. This program has been running for a number of years, and over time they've addressed a wide range of issues: healthy eating, administrative procedures for writing up critical incidents that don't impact coworker relationships negatively. The most impressive application was to improve indoor air quality in the prisons, which included a mix of activities, administrative controls to keep the air conditioning running at all times, training the inmates themselves to clean the air ducts, and eventually led to the Department of Corrections committing substantial funding to upgrading the HVAC systems in these facilities, which was an outcome that no one had imagined at the beginning would occur. A third case study is the work of Jen Cavallari on applying total worker health to hearing protection. This project was carried out with road maintenance workers who, of course, perform very variable work over the course of the year, much of which includes heavy equipment that produces a lot of noise. And so it's inevitable that the administrative control of hearing protection devices is going to be heavily utilized. But in this situation, it wasn't actually a consistent practice. And so the design team of workers spent time again discussing root causes of noise exposure and hearing loss, identifying knowledge gaps, discomfort of hearing protection devices, which we're probably already familiar with, and also questions about what should be used when, and also the impact of the safety climate and culture especially lack of supervisor and coworker support for actually wearing hearing protective devices. And they developed a comprehensive program emphasizing actually safety leadership training for their supervisors, as well as a noise hazard scheme that workers could use to quickly identify the appropriate types of hearing protection for the machinery that they would be using in a given day, and building in that pre-shift planning into the morning work orders so that workers would arrive on site with the devices that they need. So it's still personal protective equipment, but it addressed work organization and safety culture. And this program had visibility within the workforce that gave workers themselves a sense of ownership, and is encouraging about long-term sustainability for that reason. Another set of questions about new research is related to what kinds of evidence would move other people to consider either workplace changes or public policy changes that would benefit workforce health and safety. One strategy has been to document the costs to employers or to society overall of failing to fix problems. And this also may be expanded to comparative effectiveness research. And I think in the total worker health mode, it's worth us also considering the interaction of working conditions with broader economic and policy issues such as housing or transportation. It's not working for us to try to persuade employers one at a time to do the right thing. So what are the ways that we can try to have some collective input? The costs of job stressors, this literature is beginning to accrue. We need to add together the wide range of indirect costs, including lost productivity, absenteeism, hiring and training replacements for people who are out for short periods of time or who leave work. And there may also be costs related to productivity or quality of work in the healthcare sector. This has included us looking at patient or client quality of care as an output of psychosocial stressors. In our nursing home research, we spent a substantial amount of time at the beginning evaluating a safe resident handling program that the company had implemented, a well-designed program which had a very positive overall benefit to cost ratio. Corporate-wide, the payback period was less than 2 years. But when we looked more deeply, we found that the benefits weren't the same in each facility, even though the program was supposedly implemented in a uniform way. This plot shows the results of a cluster analysis that defined two fairly distinct groups of nursing facilities. A little bit of overlap, but not much, as you can see. And cluster 1 in blue here scored higher, that is, had more desirable characteristics than the other group. So the nursing homes in this cluster generally had both better conditions from the perception of employees, as well as better conditions for the residents' experience. And the ones that I've starred here are those that have financial implications for the nursing home, either in terms of their labor costs or in terms of their ability to recruit clients or patients. And so this becomes then another way to frame the desirable outcomes of an occupational safety program. This strategy has also been applied on the national level. This study from Australia took the prevalence of depression in working adults, which was about six. Stop. Do it again. This slide illustrates applying the same strategy to national data, in this case to Australia. The authors identified that about 6% of depression in the country's workforce was attributable to job strain. And they estimated that the costs associated with that attributable depression were over $3 billion per year for lost productive time and nearly $9 billion per year from job turnover and the costs of employee replacement. Will this kind of evidence be effective? Peter Schnall at the Healthy Work Campaign has enumerated for us a number of obstacles to moving towards healthy work in our society. They are obviously quite substantial. We can't be naive about what we're facing, and we can't fix all of this through research. NIOSH and its constituents, meaning us, we need allies. So I'd like to also encourage us to think about how we can partner with people outside our usual framework in order to move society towards healthier work. I think we really need to be prepared to partner with intermediary organizations to help produce more change. And there are some nice case studies of how intermediary organizations have been utilized in the occupational health world. Brad Evanoff hosted a roundtable at APHA last year about working with construction unions and a contractors association to address both suicide prevention and opioid use prevention in the construction workforce. Cora Roloffs has a process for working with unions to develop tailored educational interventions for their members on opioid awareness that has been demonstrated to be meaningful in 3 very different professional groups. The Total Worker Health Center at the University of Illinois in Chicago designed a program to build multi-sector partnerships around precarious work. They created a dialogue process between labor organizations and health organizations for learning from each other, developing a shared definition of a problem, and moving toward and proposing collective action that was feasible, that they could actually move towards. And they've highlighted that in addition to their educating representatives from these groups, there was very important two-way knowledge exchange between the people in these 2 types of organizations, where genuine dialogue developed and several teams of multi-sectorial partners actually put some of their planning into action. So I think this illustrates some of what we might be doing in terms of training and workforce development. We need to be preparing both practitioners and the researchers of the future in the skills to address these kinds of needs. Today's student is tomorrow's workplace research partner. For us to study workplace problems and their solutions, the occupational safety and health practitioner is often the key workplace contact who does or doesn't advocate for our proposal. We need them to be able to think broadly about how the whole system operates, as well as to appreciate the depth of the process that's involved. We and they need to be able to listen to individual workers. We need to be able to network within the workplace with other people who have responsibilities that impact workforce health and well-being. I hope I've framed a new paradigm that should include assessing the ways that work and non-work problems interact with each other as obstacles to workforce health and well-being. So thank you very much for your attention. Again, my deep appreciation for all of the colleagues at CPHNU whose work is reflected in this presentation, and I look forward to feedback from you.
Thank you, Dr. Punnett, for sharing your experience and insight, and for a stimulating presentation that is spot on with the theme of the Ex4OSH conference. Now we have another short break, after which we'll kick off our first set of concurrent sessions featuring peer-reviewed oral abstract presentations. Then a bit later in the morning, we'll move to our first plenary session moderated by Dr. Lee Newman and his panel of invited experts. You don't want to miss a minute of that. See you soon.